Good morning, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to today's video. And we are finally talking about the gubernatorial elections this year. I haven't forgotten. But before we get into it, likes, comments, subscriptions, they always do help, and I greatly appreciate them. I'd love to reach 1,000 by the end of the year. I'm sorry uploads haven't been as frequent as I've been trying to get them to be, but, you know, work is a real thing, okay? And I'm doing quite well there, so I'm not going to be complaining too much about that. Anyway, so let's actually start talking about it. I filled out every race that I don't really think is going to be all that competitive. Vermont is because Phil Scott is running for re-election, and I don't see Sununu losing in New Hampshire. I just don't. I also don't see DeWine even being in a close to competitive race, so yeah. It's weird to me, though, that, well, a lot of these races still haven't been polled yet, which is, it's a little bit unusual for me. I think Oregon actually, I can't remember. No, Oregon has not been. But I think right now we're expecting Oregon to be very competitive just because of how unpopular Kate Brown is up there. Yeah, she's really being a drag. I'm going to tilt it in favor of the Democrats, but in a good national environment, I could really see Oregon flipping. Moving on to Minnesota, most of the general election polls have been done by a Minneapolis news affiliate, and they show Walz being pretty comfortable. There hasn't been a ton of polling out of Illinois, but there's a pretty strong Republican candidate running who may be able to get some of the suburbs back and maybe flip the state, at least at the gubernatorial level. And that's the thing y'all have to remember out there is gubernatorial races tend to be a lot less partisan than anything at the federal level, though they have been starting to drift towards elections that match the federal level. It's why I'm slightly touchy about putting New York in the super safe realm, because I mean, Emerson has polled it a few times, including once in early May, and they have Zeldin being competitive. Whether or not that's true is a completely different story. Oh, wait, sorry. Whoops. There were a few polls of New York, but most of them show I was reading the primary poll. Oops. That's on me. There were a handful of competitive polls, but most of them involved Cuomo, who I don't think is going to beat Hochul in a primary, so... But if Cuomo does win the Democratic primary in New York, that would be on upset alert for me. Now we get into the really fun section, which is the truly competitive races, which there's actually a lot here. Starting with Kansas, I think Kansas is it's pretty comfortable that it's going to be a flip, I think. Not that confident just yet, but I don't think it's unreasonable to assume it'll flip. What's their governor's name? Laura Kelly. She only just barely won in 2018, and part of that was because there was a strong third-party conservative candidate who took away a lot of votes that would have otherwise gone to the Republican. Actually, that's one of the other reasons why Oregon is going to be competitive, is there is a strong independent candidate who leans a little bit more towards the Democratic side of the fence. He was, in fact, a former Democratic state legislator. So, yeah, Democrats have a bit of an uphill battle in Oregon because of that. Alaska, there's only potential for it to be competitive due to the weird primary that they have and the ranked choice voting thing. We'll see if that really matters. I'm skeptical, but I'm going to put it as likely Republican for now, but who knows? Things can get weird when ranked choice voting exists and you have ranked choice voting and a jungle primary. Going to... Let's just go from west to east for the rest of this. Nevada is kind of interesting. You have the incumbent, Sisolak, who basically, if you look at the Suffolk polls from the Reno Journal, or Reno newspaper, the Republicans are doing quite well. And if you look at the Nevada Independent, which is a different publication, Sisolak is doing quite well. So it's going to be interesting to see which one of those actually matters. It's a Republican favorable environment, and the Republicans do have very strong candidates who have won statewide in Nevada, running in that election, and we'll see exactly what happens. But you've got Dean Heller, who's former senator. I think, if I remember correctly, Laxalt's running in the Senate. Republicans have a strong ticket, and that could prove to be pretty vital because Nevada is... The Nevada Democrats that are in office are kind of meh to me. Catherine Cortez Masto, you pretty much may as well literally replace her on the ballot with generic Democrat, and you get probably the exact same result. Sisolak is, in my opinion, not much better. This could be a flip, but I'm going to currently tilt it towards the incumbent just because I want to make that, if I'm going to make a mistake, it's going to be in favor of the incumbent. Arizona, open seat, and we don't have any general election polls, or at least I haven't seen any, but it looks like Carrie Lake is leading for the Republicans, and Katie Hobbs is leading for the Democrats. In a Republican-favorable national environment, even though the Arizona GOP is kind of setting itself on fire, self-immolating, as I like to say, I think that's going to be enough, especially with the national environment being the way it is, and Arizona having some of the worst. It's probably going... I'm confident in saying that race leans Republican, but it is going to be competitive, one way or another. And New Mexico, I see as a more likely flip than Colorado. I think Polis is well liked. The only reason why it may be competitive is national environment, but like I said, that matters a little bit less in gubernatorial elections. New Mexico, the only reason why I think it's a little bit more competitive is because there's a lot more interesting dynamics going on in New Mexico than there are in Colorado. Colorado is becoming a lot more educated. It's a lot whiter. It's pretty consistent. But with the growing intrigue into whether or not Latino voter shifts are continuing across the country compared to 2022, compared to 2020, whether or not those shifts from 2020 are sticking around or exacerbating, or whether or not it was just a one-year thing, it's absolutely going to be interesting to see. And I think the Republican Party is actually working on doing outreach in those groups. So, and I know for a fact they're doing it in Texas, and that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit more confident in Texas. Abbott isn't hated, but Beto O'Rourke is kind of doing the whole stir up controversy to get name recognition and put yourself on an equal footing at kind of the worst way possible. He thought that after Uvalde, I don't actually know how to say that town's name. Uvalde, I think is how you say it. I think he's kind of doing it the wrong way. And he's sounding like a Karen, basically. And that isn't what's going to win you office in Texas. And the Republicans are, from what I've heard and from what I've been seeing, the Republican Party in Texas is absolutely marketing itself in the Rio Grande Valley and among Latino voters within the state as a whole. Yeah, they're going to have a hard time in urban areas, but in those rural areas and along the Rio Grande River, absolutely possible to win. And I don't think that it's all that unlikely, to be honest with you. So I'm a little bit more confident in Texas. Than I think a lot of forecasters would be. And a lot of the polling has shown that it's not really that... it's not really all that competitive. Though I have noticed that Abbott isn't polling at... has only had one poll, only a handful of polls put him above 50%. O'Rourke, I think in only 1, 2, 3, 4, only 4 polls I'm seeing O'Rourke above 40%. And to be 100% honest, Abbott's right around that 50%. So I'm pretty confident here there's about a 7% gap on average. That allows me to be pretty confident in this. And we'll see where polling goes as time continues. But I don't really think that O'Rourke's going to win that. So, moving over to Florida, DeSantis is just crushing everybody. I'm very confident about this race, so much so that unless things really hit the fan, I don't see this flipping. I see only 2 polls, and both were from either January or last year. I only see 2 polls where DeSantis is below 50%. Most recent poll was from February, and DeSantis was crushing Charlie Crist, who is a former governor of Florida. So, yeah. That's pretty bad. Like, it's 20%. If we go to Georgia governor, looking at that one, we're in the general now, and Brian Kemp has about an average of 5-point lead over Stacey Abrams, and he's polling right at 50%. I'm reasonably comfortable in saying that Georgia is going to stay stay with a Republican governor. We'll see, but I think that in the South, a 5-point lead is a lot more substantial than a 5-point lead, say, in Wisconsin. And speaking of the Midwest, in Iowa, we have Kim Reynolds versus Paul Dahl, more than likely. We just had but Iowa's it's becoming a red state, though Reynolds was barely elected in 2018. But the National Environment will help her. Campaigning alongside Grassley will help her. I think this is going to stay in Republican hands, but it's absolutely flippable. We go to Wisconsin, where you've got Evers, who's going to run against, well, there's a few candidates. I believe Kleefisch is the most likely challenger. But Evers isn't all that popular, and the Republicans are continuing to make inroads in the lower part of the Mississippi Valley, right along that, right in the Driftless area. And I think there's going to be some rebound in the suburbs, mostly because Trump is not going to be on the ballot. I'm going to stick around and say that, this is one time I'll break with my air on the side of the incumbent. Michigan. Oh boy. This one's pretty bad. Conveniently for the Democrats, and I know what I'm about to say is going to make it sound like a conspiracy theory, and I definitely think there's something fishy going on. Something very fishy going on. But conveniently for the Democrats, the most widely known Republicans running in the gubernatorial election suddenly had their names taken off the ballot for the primaries because tens of thousands of signatures were invalidated. Very suspicious for me. To the point where, because they were not just the three most well-known, but they were the three most competitive in a general election from a polling perspective, and were also the three frontrunners for the GOP nomination, it's just unusually convenient for the Democrats. And I don't really see how it was just a fluke. It just seems too perfect to happen. I know true life is stranger than fiction. But good God Almighty, does this put fiction, does this make fiction blush if this really happened? Where it really was just a chance coincidence that tens of thousands of petitioners' signatures were invalidated, stripping the three frontrunners in the Republican primary who would be challenging Democratic incumbent Gretchen Whitmer, who were also the three most competitive in a general election from a polling perspective. I don't know. That seems too good to be true if you're a Democrat. And it's making me wonder if there was some fraud. And I'm not the type to call fraud every time a Democrat benefits. Because guess what? Republicans can benefit from fraud too. And I'm not the type to call foul anytime something weird happens. But when it's this major of a race, and it's this perfect of a scenario for a deeply unpopular incumbent, makes you wonder. But because this is YouTube, I have to say that it's what happened and what the media is reporting, what the Michigan government is saying is the absolute truth. And anyone who says that it's fishy is spreading disinformation and is obviously trying to sell you snake oil. So, there you go. I'm not even going to rate this race because I think it's disgusting. Pennsylvania, oh boy. Surprisingly, I don't have any general election polls, but you've got Josh Shapiro versus Doug Mastriano. In a year where the Republicans are all going to campaign around each other, and you've got probably the best Republican candidate for the Senate that, in terms of just wanting to win the seat. Maybe not the truest conservative, but you've definitely got someone who is going to be a good fit for the collar counties, where the Republican needs to get just enough votes in order to win in Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz. And Doug Mastriano is probably going to let Oz do his campaigning for him, or he should. But Mastriano really should probably tie himself to Oz in order to say, hey, look, I'm running on the same ticket as this guy. I'm going to focus on Pennsylvania. He'll focus on the Senate. Put us both in office and we'll do good things. Short, sweet, to the point. Doesn't turn off any of the potential suburban voters, and when you go out to small town rallies and middle of coal country, then you can trump it up. But in the collar counties, you don't want to be controversial. You just don't. And I'm not sure Mastriano can do it, but because he's going to be running in the same year Senate seat is up, and split ticketing just isn't a thing anymore, and I think Oz is going to have the benefit of the national environment pushing him over the edge. That'll just barely extend. The coattails will just barely extend, and I think Mastriano will carry over. I hate that I'm leaving Michigan blank, but the whole situation that's going on there is so disgusting, I don't feel comfortable rating it. Anyway, so we have the interesting elections. I say interesting, but they kind of are. We have two open seats in Massachusetts and Maryland that were Republican held, and that because of, you know what, I'm just that confident. I don't really think the Republicans are going to compete in either of those seats. Charlie Baker, if he ran again, would have absolutely dominated in Massachusetts. Maryland, Larry Hogan is term limited. So at the end of the day, he'd need his lieutenant governor to maybe run, and even then, I'm not sure Maryland's got enough Democrats who are willing to cross over for some guy who Larry Hogan endorses but isn't Larry Hogan. Then we go to the southern New England states of Rhode Island and Connecticut. Connecticut, I think, could absolutely flip. New England loves Republican governors for some reason, even though they're all pretty deep blue states except for New Hampshire and Maine. But that's because a lot of the Republicans that are running for governor who are successful tend to be pretty moderate, or at least are moderate to liberal on social issues. They're still pretty much financial hawks, but they like that up there. Rhode Island could be competitive, but right now I could see Connecticut flipping. But I guess to be on the safe side, I'll have it as a leans Democrat. Maine, I don't know. I don't think Paul LePage can get past ranked choice voting. I think he'll just turn off too many people in the general election that he'll get close to 50%, but I don't think he'll be able to win instant runoff effectively. So right now I'm going to tilt this towards the incumbent, but Paul LePage could win it. But I don't know. It just depends on how galvanized Republican turnout is. We'll see. I'll put it, but right now none of the Republicans are impressing me in Michigan. But then again, they're not the cream of the crop on the Republican side. So, anyway, that's about it. Right now, that's where my governor's map stands. It's a lot more competitive than the Senate or the House map, and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that could change. So, we've still got a long 5 months till November. So, stick around, likes, comments, subscriptions, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.